For decades, the United States held a firm grip on global power, militarily, economically, and culturally. But in 2025, that grip is slipping, and some nations aren't just drifting away, they're actively turning their backs. Whether it's shifting alliances, economic dependence on new powers, or backlash against past interventions, America is facing a new reality. Not everyone's buying what it's selling. From Latin America to the Indo-Pacific, countries that once relied on Washington are now looking elsewhere for influence, investment, and partnership. Some see this as the natural ebb and flow of global politics. Others, a warning sign of America's waning supremacy. Today on Globe Discoveries, we're counting down the 10 countries where U.S. influence is fading fast in 2025, and the reasons behind it may be more complicated than you think. Number 10. Saudi Arabia. Once considered one of America's closest partners in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is rapidly charting an independent course. In 2025, the kingdom deepened ties with China and Russia, inking energy, security, and infrastructure deals that signal a shift away from U.S. dependence. The U.S.-Saudi oil for security relationship is no longer the unshakable bond it once was. Earlier this year, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman hosted a trilateral summit with Roman XI Jinping and Vladimir Putin in Riyadh, a move seen by many as a snub to Washington. According to Bloomberg, the meeting concluded with a multi-billion-dollar agreement for Chinese and Russian firms to jointly develop a new oil refinery in the eastern province without a single American contractor involved. Meanwhile, U.S. arms sales to the kingdom have stalled due to human rights concerns, giving Russia and China room to expand their military footprint. The realignment isn't just political, it's cultural and economic too. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 reforms prioritize tourism and technology partnerships, and increasingly, those contracts are going to Asian and European firms. The kingdom also joined BRICS in 2024, strengthening its commitment to multipolar diplomacy. This growing distance is particularly stark in global energy policy. Saudi Arabia recently joined China in promoting the petro-yuan as an alternative to the US dollar in oil trade, a move with huge implications for American financial dominance. Though relations with Washington remain intact on paper, the influence gap is undeniable. America hasn't lost Saudi Arabia entirely, but it's no longer calling the shots like it used to. And in 2025, the kingdom seems perfectly content to build its future without waiting for Washington's approval. Number 9. South Africa. In recent years, South Africa has moved further away from U.S. influence, and 2025 marks a new low point. The country has increasingly aligned itself with BRICS partners, especially China and Russia, while criticizing what it sees as Western double standards. Washington's attempts to engage Pretoria have been met with diplomatic caution and strategic deflection. Earlier this year, South Africa hosted joint naval drills with Russia and China off the coast of Durban, a move widely condemned by U.S. officials. President Cyril Ramaphosa defended the exercise, calling it an assertion of South Africa's sovereignty and a shift toward a non-aligned foreign policy. The drills came just weeks after South Africa declined a U.S. request to enforce sanctions against Russian entities. Economically, China has now overtaken the U.S. as South Africa's largest trading partner. Beijing has poured billions into infrastructure, mining, and digital development, while American investments have stagnated due to concerns over regulatory instability. South African leaders have openly praised the no-strings-attached approach of Chinese aid. U.S.-South Africa tensions also flared in international forums, with Pretoria voting against Washington-backed resolutions at the UN on multiple occasions. These included measures related to global security, digital governance, and human rights. South Africa has made it clear it won't be pressured by Western expectations. While ties haven't been cut, South Africa's actions in 2025 speak volumes. The nation is pursuing its own path, and that path is leading away from American leadership. Number 8. Pakistan. America's complicated relationship with Pakistan has taken another turn in 2025, and it's not one in Washington's favor. Once a critical U.S. ally in the war on terror, Pakistan is now deepening its ties with China, Russia, and even Iran. Its recent decision to reject U.S. military aid packages while embracing Chinese security investments marks a major geopolitical shift. In January, Islamabad signed a defense technology agreement with Beijing, including the transfer of drone and missile systems previously considered off-limits. This came shortly after Pakistan hosted trilateral military talks with China and Russia without even notifying U.S. counterparts. Meanwhile, the Pakistani government has intensified rhetoric around respect for sovereignty in a not-so-subtle jab at past U.S. interventions. The economic picture tells a similar story. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) continues to expand, with new rail and energy projects launched in early 2025. U.S. infrastructure offers, once a possibility under Build Back Better world, have largely fallen flat due to Pakistani skepticism and shifting loyalties. Public sentiment in Pakistan also plays a key role. A 2025 Pew survey found that only 17% of Pakistanis view the U.S. favorably, compared to 65% who see China as a positive influence. Anti-American narratives are gaining traction in media and politics alike. As Pakistan pivots toward new power centers, America's influence is dwindling fast. And unless Washington finds a new way to re-engage, the strategic divorce may become permanent. Number 7. Philippines. Once a cornerstone of America's Indo-Pacific strategy, the Philippines is starting to drift from Washington's orbit in 2025. While the U.S. still maintains military access under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement (EDCA), President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been increasingly vocal about balancing relations between China and the West. This independent foreign policy approach is beginning to reflect in Manila's decisions. In April 2025, the Philippines joined a regional trade bloc led by China that excludes the U.S., sparking criticism from American officials. Additionally, the Philippine Senate delayed ratifying a new defense pact with the U.S., citing concerns over sovereignty and foreign entanglements. Meanwhile, Manila has accepted major infrastructure investments from Beijing, despite ongoing maritime disputes. This shift is partly driven by economics. China is now the Philippines' largest trading partner, and Chinese-backed projects from railways to energy grids are creating jobs and winning hearts. By contrast, American firms have faced red tape and public backlash over perceived neocolonial interests. Public opinion is also shifting. A March 2025 Pulse Asia poll found that 58% of Filipinos support neutrality between the U.S. and China, up from just 34% 5 years ago. This reflects growing wariness of being caught in a great power showdown. While ties with the U.S. remain intact, they're no longer unshakable. The Philippines is making it clear it wants options and Washington can't assume loyalty is guaranteed. Number 6. Egypt. Egypt, long a recipient of American military aid, is moving away from the U.S. and toward a more diversified foreign policy in 2025. Cairo's frustrations with U.S. conditional aid and criticism over human rights have pushed it closer to Russia, China, and Gulf allies. The result? A steady erosion of American sway over the most populous Arab country. Earlier this year, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi signed a multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Russia, bypassing traditional U.S. suppliers. This was followed by joint military drills with Chinese forces in the Red Sea, a first for Egypt. These moves came just months after the U.S. paused a portion of its aid package due to concerns over political repression. China has also stepped in as a major investor. The new administrative capital project, one of Egypt's largest ever infrastructure undertakings, is now being funded and built largely by Chinese firms. The U.S., despite earlier interest, has largely been sidelined in favor of faster, less conditional deals from Beijing. Culturally and diplomatically, Egypt is signaling its intent to be non-aligned. In 2025, it abstained from several UN votes pushed by the U.S. and hosted forums promoting multipolarity in global governance. These moves underline a shift in worldview that doesn't center around Washington. America's influence in Egypt isn't gone, but it's undeniably shrinking. And if current trends continue, the balance of power in North Africa could shift dramatically in the years ahead. Number 5. Turkey. Turkey's relationship with the United States has always been complex, but in 2025, that complexity is turning into clear distance. As a NATO member, Turkey was once a vital pillar of our strategy. Yet President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is now embracing a far more independent and often anti-Western agenda. The result? Washington is quickly losing sway over one of the most strategically located nations on Earth. This year, Turkey finalized a long-delayed agreement with Russia to expand the Turk Stream gas pipeline, despite U.S. objections. Simultaneously, it deepened defense ties with China, purchasing advanced drone technology that excludes American compatibility. And to further complicate matters, Ankara blocked NATO expansion talks, seen by many as a direct counter to U.S. interests. Domestically, Erdogan continues to use anti-American rhetoric to rally nationalist support. State-controlled media regularly depict the U.S. as a declining empire interfering in Turkey's internal affairs. That narrative is gaining traction, especially among the youth. Meanwhile, Turkey is cozying up to the BRICS bloc, actively participating in economic summits and signaling interest in adopting alternative financial systems like the digital yuan. These are clear signals that Ankara is preparing for a future less reliant on the US dollar or US approval. While Turkey isn't severing ties entirely, it's steadily eroding US leverage. The shift isn't loud, but it's deliberate, and in 2025, the gap is more visible than ever. Number 4. Mexico. Geographically close but politically distant, Mexico is becoming less dependent on U.S. influence despite being one of its largest trading partners. In 2025, under President Claudia Sheinbaum's leadership, Mexico has doubled down on its own economic sovereignty, while tightening relationships with emerging markets like Brazil, China, and even Russia. What was once an automatic alignment with U.S. policies is now subject to serious negotiation or outright rejection. Earlier this year, Mexico pulled out of a U.S.-led regional security framework, citing unequal terms and overreach by American agencies. The move followed a heated standoff over DEA operations in Mexico, which Sheinbaum's administration claimed violated national sovereignty. Since then, the Mexican government has invited international observers to reassess bilateral cooperation agreements. On the trade front, Mexico is increasingly turning toward Asia. New supply chain partnerships with Chinese and South Korean manufacturers have shifted production lines away from American-owned plants. And while the USMCA, the trade deal formerly known as NAFTA, remains in effect, it's being quietly undermined by side deals with non-US partners. Public sentiment is shifting, too. A 2025 survey by El Financiero found that 53% of Mexicans believe the U.S. holds too much sway over national affairs, while trust in American leadership has hit a 5-year low. This skepticism is reshaping Mexico's domestic and foreign policy alike. Despite their shared border, Mexico is proving that physical proximity doesn't guarantee political alignment. In 2025, it's carving out its own path, and Washington is finding it harder to keep up. Number 3. Brazil. Brazil is emerging as a powerhouse in Latin America, and it's doing so on its own terms, increasingly independent of U.S. influence. Under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil has been vocal about pursuing a multipolar world, often siding with China and Russia on major international issues. In 2025, that ambition is translating into policy and pushing Washington further to the margins. Earlier this year, Brazil refused to sign a joint U.S.-backed resolution condemning Russian actions in Ukraine, choosing neutrality instead. The move was followed by the announcement of a new BRICS investment bank facility headquartered in São Paulo, funded in part by Chinese capital. These developments represent a clear pivot toward alternatives to Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Economically, Brazil is diversifying away from the U.S. dollar, finalizing bilateral trade agreements with China and India in their respective national currencies. Meanwhile, American tech companies have faced increasing regulation and scrutiny in Brazil, with several facing hefty fines for data privacy violations. Lula's administration has made it clear Brazil wants to be treated as a global equal, not a junior partner. As the largest economy in Latin America, Brazil's influence is rising and its reliance on U.S. support is falling fast. In 2025, Washington finds itself watching from the sidelines as Brasilia builds a new global playbook. Number 2. Indonesia. Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous country, is stepping into its own spotlight in 2025 and doing so with less and less help from the U.S. long seen as a quiet ally. Jakarta is now asserting an independent foreign policy that prioritizes regional stability and economic nationalism over Western alignment. The result? A noticeable cooling in U.S.-Indonesia relations. In February 2025, Indonesia signed a landmark strategic partnership with China focused on energy, cybersecurity, and AI infrastructure. This followed the cancellation of a planned military base expansion in Papua, which Indonesian lawmakers blocked over concerns of sovereignty and environmental impact. American diplomats were reportedly blindsided by the decision. Public perception is shifting too. According to a 2025 national poll, fewer than 30% of Indonesians believe the U.S. has a positive impact on their country, a sharp drop from 5 years ago. The youth in particular are rallying around a Southeast Asia first sentiment that sees Western involvement as outdated. Indonesia isn't turning hostile, but it's turning inward and eastward. And in 2025, that means America's voice in the world's largest Muslim-majority nation is being steadily turned down. Number 1. India. Topping the list is India, a country often labeled as a U.S. strategic partner, but one that's quietly slipping out of America's sphere of influence in 2025. Despite continued cooperation on defense and technology, New Delhi is increasingly pursuing an assertive, non-aligned foreign policy that emphasizes autonomy over alliance. From trade to global diplomacy, India is making decisions based on its own calculus, not Washington's. This year, India shocked observers by abstaining from a U.S.-led vote on sanctions against Iran, citing energy security and regional stability. At the same time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosted the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Delhi, welcoming leaders from China, Russia, and Iran. It was a clear signal: India is willing to engage with all sides whether or not the U.S. approves. The cultural current is changing, too. Indian social media and news outlets have grown increasingly critical of U.S. foreign policy, especially around the Indo-Pacific and Ukraine. Meanwhile, youth movements in India are promoting indigenous innovation over foreign dependency. While ties between Washington and New Delhi remain cooperative, they're no longer one-directional. In 2025, India is playing the global field, and that means U.S. influence has competition like never before. America isn't vanishing from the global stage, but its uncontested dominance is. In 2025, countries across the world are rethinking what partnership with the U.S. really means, and many are choosing to diversify, decentralize, or detach entirely. It's not just about diplomacy anymore, it's about leverage, autonomy, and evolving worldviews. From Asia to Africa, Latin America to the Middle East, the shift is real. Whether it's trade, military ties, or public sentiment, U.S. influence is no longer guaranteed. And unless Washington adapts to this new reality, it could find itself sidelined in a world it once led. Which country surprised you most on this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you learned something new. And don't forget to subscribe for more geopolitical deep dives from Globe Discoveries. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.